more comfortable on that side of the Amud than this side of the Amud, but I'll try. Thank you. Okay. Before I share memories and talk about my mother's life, I just wanted to say that my mother died the day before Shavuot. So this Shavuot, I've come full circle through all the different phases of mourning. And last Sunday was her unveiling. So I want to thank this community before I start for walking with me on this journey, starting with Shiva, Shloshim, a daily minyan that allowed me to say Kaddish. And I feel so grateful to be able to lift up her memory today in front of all of you. Very special. The day dawned gloomy in Manhattan last Sunday. Shabbat had been bright and sparkly for my nephew's Ufruf. But Sunday morning, the Hudson River was gray. People were carrying umbrellas. It was my mom's unveiling. We drove out to Queens, and as we approached the cemetery, big drops began to splatter the windshield. We wound our way to Mom's grave, in and out of a confusing labyrinth of one-way lanes, dead-ending where they weren't supposed to. The windshield wipers were swishing. We arrived, we grabbed our umbrellas and assembled. The rain turned to drizzle. We read a poem. We sang a psalm. The drizzle stopped. The cloud cover broke a bit, bringing some hazy light and some glimpses of blue sky, and the mockingbirds began to sing really loudly. We all smiled and nodded. Of course, said one of the grandchildren. Grandma would have wanted us to be comfortable. My mother, Doris Goldstein, was born in Brooklyn in 1925. She grew up in a tight-knit Orthodox family with close friends and cousins nearby. She would often reminisce about her family's visits with friends and relatives on Shabbat afternoon, a routine so established that the family dog, who was often left home alone to fend for himself, would find a way out and trot from porch to porch until he found them. My grandmother, a feminist before her time, wanted her daughter, my mother, to have a Jewish education. In 1932, my mother was enrolled in Shalamis School for Girls, the first Orthodox school for girls in North America. She attended Shalamis until 8th grade, excelling in Hebrew and Tanakh studies, and she shared her passion and love for those subjects with me and my siblings throughout her life. A memory she often shared was about visiting her Zaidi on Shabbat afternoons. Being a man of Torah himself, he would take out his Tanakh and question her. My mother described preparing for these visits. She said, and I quote, "I studied more for those visits than I did for school. I felt the weight of womankind on my shoulders." Zaidi was so thrilled with her. He pinched her cheeks until they were cherry red, but she beamed when she would tell this story, even half a century later. My mother graduated Brooklyn College, having majored in chemistry, met my father in Jewish summer camp, and was married in 1945. In their wedding picture, my dad is still in uniform. Their 63-year marriage was one of partnership, love, and respect. They loved each other, they really liked each other, and kidded each other with fun and laughter. My mother was an at-home mom when we were young. There was always music in the house. I remember Broadway show tunes playing on our record player, and I knew the lyrics and the romantic plot lines of a lot of Broadway shows at a very young age. When the records weren't playing, Mom would go about the house and sing. Don't get me wrong, she was not a singer. She was joyful, playful, and suffused the space around her with lightness and energy. When I shared this memory on Sunday at her unveiling, several grandchildren jumped in, remembering the special repertoire of songs that she shared with them. As we got older, she began teaching at the religious school of our shul. She taught students young and old, eventually starting an adult bat mitzvah program. And she was beloved by both young and old. At her shiva, several of her former students, now in their 60s, shared stories and fond memories of her warmth, her enthusiasm, her songs, and her ways of capturing both their attention and their hearts. Two of the women wondered aloud about whether they would still be so connected to Jewish life if it weren't for her. I could go on at length about her work, her involvement in a variety of organizations, and her last professional endeavor as a teacher of young children, underprivileged young children, and a family educator doing parent training. But it's her warmth, understanding, and accepting love I want to dwell on for just a moment. The sense of security and comfort that she imparted to me lasted a lifetime. She was always there, listening deeply and patiently, and always knew what to say. She was strong in her convictions, but gentle in her advice. And it wasn't just her children. Friends were drawn to her, and even my friends found their way to our living room. She drew people in with her warmth, her sharp insight and sensitivity, and her ability to listen and comfort. Just the sound of her voice at the other end of the telephone when I called her with a problem or a concern eased me and calmed me throughout my life. As Mom's memory began to fail and her anchors in time frayed, our time together often left me with a sense of loss and sadness. No matter how good or long the visit, when I left for her, our visit evaporated. Over time, I learned to simply be with her in the moment. I embraced her joy and her excitement to see me. I could tell her stories about grandchildren and great-grandchildren and watch her eyes sparkle and her face glow, and I could let myself be held in her expressions of deep love and appreciation. The fact that she wouldn't remember that I was there didn't diminish the quality of our time together. My siblings and I celebrated her 96th birthday with her. After we sang happy birthday and dug into some very gooey chocolate cake, which was her favorite, her only criticism of me was, how could you be a vanilla person? We asked her if she had any wisdom to impart. She expressed gratitude for her longevity and a deep love and appreciation for her children. My mother always imparted life lessons in her words and by example: love, gratitude, and cherishing the moment. Thank you.
Sure, Sandy, thank you for bringing your journey and your mother's presence into this space so that we can all get a glimpse of her and her impact on your life. Our second speaker is Mayor Sherer. Mayor has served as our Director of Congregational Learning for the last 9 years, and he directs our school, our youth activities, works closely with the rest of our staff to make sure that we have wonderful programs on our Chagim, on our holidays, and throughout the year. He's originally from Albany, Ir HaKodesh, the sacred city of Albany, the capital of all things Jewish. New York and Jewish. He moved to Boston after graduating from the joint program between Columbia and JTS, where he had a fine dean as his dean. Dean Lerner. He worked for the Jewish Community Centers of Greater Boston, Temple Israel of Boston, and the Bureau of Jewish Education, Congregation Beth Israel in Worcester, and Or Atid in Wayland. Holds a master's in social work and a master's in Jewish education. He's married to Kfir Mizrahi, And last year, he lost his beloved mother, Esther Sherer, Zichrono Livracha, and speak of his experience grieving this loss. Let me say personally that it's a gift to have you in our community and on staff. Your work, your friendship, your insights are a gift to me and to the entire community, and most especially to the next generation for whom our future is being both written and will be handed to them and is being handed to them. Your passion for your job, your teaching, your work is inspiring and such a bracha, blessing to all of us. Invite Mayor to share his reflections.
Chag Sameach. Like Sandy, I want to thank the community for being with me throughout my my journey during my year of mourning. Working in a synagogue, one is somewhat of a public figure, and one's life is very much an open book. And it was the religious school, the children in the religious school, this community, congregants who really were there for me during my year of mourning, very much like when my father passed away, which is also part of my story. When I was 9, my father died, and the synagogue community was there for me. And I learned at that time the importance of community, what community can mean for you, what a minyan can mean for you, and grew up the child of a synagogue, and bring all of that with me to my work today. My mom, Esther, was one of a kind. She grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. She was tough. She was the oldest of her siblings, both boys. In addition, she was the oldest grandchild on her mother's side of the family, in a family with 8 grandchildren. She was the one of only 2 girls. My mom grew up during World War II, and she would often share memories of those years with me. When my mom married my father, she moved to Albany, New York. It wasn't easy entering the Sherer family, even though, being a first cousin once removed, I'll let that sink in for a moment. We can talk at great length about that. She was already in the family. My mother and I were actually second cousins. My father was the last of his brothers to marry. He was the youngest of 5 boys. One of them who died in infancy, and 2 of them who had already been married for years. The Sherer family had their own way of doing things. It wasn't always easy for my mom, or my dad for that matter. My mom would often tell me how my father's mom would tell her that my mother did things in her own way, but somehow they always came out right. My mom married my father knowing that he had major heart issues and didn't know how long their lives together would be. They married in 1964 and remained together until his death in 1975. At this time, my mother became both mother and father to me and my younger sister. After our father died, our mother faced many challenges. I recall her telling me, I actually just recall learning that all of her bank and credit card accounts had been frozen because nothing was solely in her name. She was known as Mrs. Robert Sherer. All my parents' accounts were held jointly. My mother didn't have anything in her own name. I learned at an early age to recognize that women had names irrespective of their husbands. I learned that it was important to have a bank account in one's own name, separate from one's partner. And I couldn't believe how when Kfir went to file for citizenship, he and I had to merge our individual accounts together to prove that we were a couple. When we were children, my sister, mother, and I were always busy. We would spend many summer weekends at Lake George with our cousins from Glens Falls. There were summers we went to Golden Acres to spend time with our Kaufman cousins. We would visit New York City and my mother's family in Maryland and New Hampshire. Although my mother was a single parent, she was able to afford my sister and me everything. She made sure we could go to summer camp, participate in USY retreats, trips cross country, trips to Israel, and study at the colleges we wanted to attend. After my sister and I moved out, my mother continued to her busy schedule. In addition to working full time, She would go to the Glimmerglass Opera in Cooperstown, Lake George, the Lake George Opera, the Albany Civic Theater, Saratoga Performing Arts Center, and more. And she attended every family function, no matter its destination. Our mother did things differently from other parents. One summer when I was a tween and my sister was in elementary school, she accompanied the two of us and my cousins and friends to see the Rocky Horror Picture Show. A parent of one of my friends was appalled given how young we were. When I was 12, I missed the first day of 7th grade because my mom was able to secure tickets for us to see Annie on Broadway. Another time, not everyone approved of her parenting. I think I turned out just fine, and I wouldn't trade these memories for anything. My mom was like a second mother to so many. She knew all of my friends. The door to our house was always open, and our fridge was always stocked with hummus and cheddar cheese, and our freezer with chicken nuggets, kosher chicken nuggets. She always chaperoned USY events and carpooled us and our friends to youth programs, and there isn't a resident who graduated at the Albany Medical Center and had a rotation in the psychiatric department who didn't see our mom as their second mom. She was always there to listen and provide a treat, but you didn't want to cross her path. I would always say, beware the wrath of Esther. She and I had some nasty fights. She could hold a grudge like no one, and she was stubborn. I see much of my mom in me. I love life. I try to live it to the fullest. Sometimes I overreact to situations and lash out. When someone crosses my path or gets me angry, watch out. My mom didn't sweat the small stuff. She would tell me how this one or that one would complain about the portion or flavor of the food they received at the meals that she went to at the senior program at the JCC, and she didn't understand all the fuss. She took it for what it was worth, a government subsidized, extremely inexpensive meal, and she would say it is what it is. My mom taught me to never show up to someone's house empty-handed and always to have my dress shoes fully buffed. She said she saved everything: birthday cards, family photos, photos of families who adopted her. She adopted, news articles, and more. 2 index cards I found while cleaning through her things include 2 different quotes she wrote down. At the close of life, the question will not be how much you have got, but how much you have given. Not how much you have won, but how much you have done. Not how much you have saved, but how much you have sacrificed. How much you have loved and served. Not how much you were honored. There is only one way to get ready for immortality, and that is to love this life and live it as bravely and faithfully and cheerfully as one can. I could say that these are words my mother lived by. You can't imagine how many gadgets my mother had owned or the things she had in her trunk of her car. If you needed it, she had it. She was famous for the piles on her kitchen table. And those of you who know me or who have been to my office know that I've inherited these traits. I also often find myself putting something I've ordered in the closet only to find that I have ordered the same thing before, or if not, twice before. My mom stood by my side until the day she died, and I know over the years I caused her some pain. When I told her, you'll be learning a little more about me here, that my ex-wife and I were getting a divorce, she stood by me. And then when I came out, she stood by me again. She opened her heart to welcome a new family when I met the man who would become my ex-husband, and then again when I met Kfir. And oh, how she loved Kfir. The two of them had their own special relationship. There was the time we were visiting Albany for Mother's Day, and she sprung it on us that she was having knee surgery the next day. She thought she had pulled one over on us because she didn't want us to be with her during the surgery, and she wanted to keep it very private. I had other thoughts. Kfir didn't need to work the next day. I would head back to Boston, and he would stay and go to the hospital with her. I'll never forget Kfir calling me that evening and speaking in a whisper from my bedroom, telling me how my mother wasn't talking to him and he didn't know what to do. That was my mom. In between the time my ex-husband and I divorced and my meeting Kfir, my mom and I spent a decade getting to know one another as single adults. We accompanied each other to family functions and family holiday gatherings. She would come to me for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and celebrate with me and my friends, something she continued doing once Kfir came into my life. Over the last few years, my mother's health began to deteriorate. It got to the point when I knew she was in the final years of her life. After my father died, my mother, sister, and I were able to stay in the house that we lived in. And this was the house my mother lived in until the day she died. She loved that house. It was her home. She was adamant that she didn't want to go to assisted living or a senior facility, that when her time came, she didn't want us to prolong her life. If she could, she would die at home in her own bed. And at the end of December 2022, my mother's brothers and their families, my sister and her family, and Kfir and I all celebrated her turning 87. The next morning, however, we needed to bring her to the emergency room for issues with her breathing, and a week later, she died. My sister and I, my brother-in-law, and Kfir did everything in our power to bring her home before she passed, and we succeeded. We brought her home on a Thursday, and she passed the next night in her house, in her own bed, with Kfir and me and my sister by her side, literally by her side in the bed. I miss my mother every day. No matter their age or their health, you are never prepared for the death of a parent. You always want more. You always want more time. I so often want to call her to let her know how my day went, how work is going, and how Kfir and I are doing. And I know that I can't. And there are times that I just want to scream. It is brutal knowing that you are never able to speak to someone you love again. I carry my mother with me, being able to share her with others, with you, and knowing that she and my father have a place in our yard site wall helps soften the pain. Thank you.